Hello and welcome, this is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to share some Wonderland collection cards using this new Wonderland collection from Spellbinders. We have the Twinkle Bright Tree press plate and it has a couple sentiments in it. That's a registration press plate, so it makes it really easy to position those sentiments. Then we have the Snowfall Shimmer background press plate, as well as the Merry Messages press plate and die set. And all three of those can be used not only in the Glimmer system, but also the BetterPress system. Then we have the three Magi die set, as well as the snowotes die set. And this one I think might be my favorite one. I use it in two different ways. I'm going to start off by foiling those press plates. So I'm going to start off with the Twinkle Bright Tree. I'm going to put the tree as well as one of the sentiments on the hot glimmer system. I'm going to foil with some Prism Glimmer foil. It's a beautiful silver foil that has a holographic shine to it, and it's one of my favorites. I'm doing all of my foiling on some Hammermill Cardstock. It's one of my favorites to do my foiling on. I had my glimmer system nice and hot, put my press plate on there, let it warm up for a few moments, put the pretty side of the foil facing the plate, and then my Hammermill Cardstock on top. Put the plates on there, press the timer button, and once that timer button was done blinking, I put it through my Platinum 6 machine. You need both the heat from the glimmer system as well as the pressure from a die cutting machine in order to do that foiling. So after doing the tree, I'm going to do that Snowfall Shimmer for a background for one of the cards. And as I do all the time, I'm also going to do the solid hot foiling for all of the pieces that I foil. I always like to do it while my glimmer system is nice and hot, as well as the fact that even if I don't use those pieces with the cards that I'm creating, it's much easier to store foiled cardstock than it is the flimsy or the really delicate foil sheets, and it only takes a few minutes. You do need to have a solid hot foil plate though. So I continue with foiling my Merry Messages. I want to have one of them foiled, one of them solid hot foiled, and then I'm going to be using these plates in my BetterPress system and do some silver embossing as well. So I have a lot of selection when I'm making my cards. Once I'm done my foiling, I can bring out that solid hot foil plate. I do need to wait a few moments for that plate to get nice and hot before doing the actual foiling. The layering is exactly the same, pretty side of the foil against the solid hot foil plate, and then Hammermill Cardstock, and then the plates on top. Press the timer. Once the timer is done, you put it through the die cutting machine. So this sentiment press plate set does 5 sentiments at once, and because I'm doing the regular foiling, the solid hot foiling, as well as the embossing, I'm going to have a ton of sentiments to choose from while I'm creating. I'm end up with making 6 cards in this video, so I have a lot of extras. Any of the extras, I just put in a little Ziploc bag, put it right with that set. Next time I want to use that set, I may already have a sentiment completely done, ready to go, that's going to suit the project that I'm creating. So these solid hot foil pieces, sometimes I will use them for cards. I will use that solid hot foiled snowflake background in this video. This solid hot foiled tree background, I don't actually use it in this video. It might be a little bit too flashy for a card background because of all of that shine. But if I don't end up using it as a card background, sometimes I'll use it as a matte for different layers, or I will use the solid parts of the solid hot foil pieces for die cutting. Rather than using up specialty cardstock, I will use it in place. It goes a long way, and it's a great way to utilize that. Now that I'm done my solid hot foiling, I'm going to use those plates in my BetterPress system. So I have that Snowfall Shimmer plate on my base of my BetterPress. I am working on some hot press watercolor paper. I typically use distress watercolor paper because I like the bright whiteness of it and would have used it for these cards. However, I've run out and I haven't been able to get some more yet. So I'm just using this hot press watercolor paper. It is nice and smooth, so it'll work perfectly for the other techniques that I'm going to be doing on it. Here I am inking that plate with VersaMark ink, and then I'm putting some super fine embossing powder on it. Anytime I emboss with press plates, I like to use super fine embossing powder whenever possible, because those press plates press into the paper, and some of those lines are super delicate. So by using the super fine embossing powder, it helps to get a lot of that detail, a lot better than just regular embossing powder. If that's not an alternative, I just use regular, but I do find I get a better result when I use the superfine. So anytime it's possible, I use that superfine. Emboss it with my embossing tool, and you can see how it goes from kind of a matte granular look to nice, shiny, glossy, beautiful embossed snowflakes. So with that snowflake background done, I'm also going to do one with the Twinkle Bright tree using that registration template. I always like to tape my template to the base of the BetterPress. That way it doesn't move on me. Whenever I use the BetterPress system, I do find that the plates don't have, there's not as much magnet pull. So larger plates, it doesn't make a difference, but when you're doing sentiments, it's really easy to move them out of place. So by making sure that that template is taped down, I can make sure that I get proper placement. So my first pressing, I'm going to do the tree, and I'm pressing it with some black StazOn ink. I'm going to be coloring this tree with some Prismacolor pencils and Gamsol, and by using the black StazOn, I know that it's not going to move on me while I'm doing that coloring. For the sentiment, I pick whichever sentiment of the two in the set that I want. There is an outline, so you get perfect placement with it. Obviously, you can change the placement if you want to, but I like the way that it has it laid out with the registration template. So I ink that with some VersaMark ink. I do want to emboss the sentiment for this. I plan on doing some silver accents for the ornaments for the tree. So by silver embossing my sentiment, it's going to coordinate beautifully. If the press plates move on that registration template while I'm inking them, I just use my fingers or a die pick, pushing the side of the press plate and moving it back in place. You definitely want to don't want to touch it where you have inked it. Once I have inked it, I can add that embossing powder, heat that or melt that, and we're ready to go. So before I start making any of the cards, I'm going to die cut my sentiments. There is a die that coordinates with those sentiments right in that press plate set. I do like to tape it in place with some Best Ever Craft tape just to make sure that it's not going to move on me. This solid hot foiled one, there's a lot of area on the sides of it that obviously don't get die cut with that sentiment. I will keep that with my specialty paper, and like I said before with my solid hot foiled pieces, I will use that to die cut different things, different embellishments. They'll work perfectly for, little ornaments or a little bow or something. They're great for Christmas cards. For my first background, I'm using the embossed or silver embossed snowflake background on the hot press watercolor paper. I'm spraying it with the Hero Arts blue metallic shimmer spray, and I'm also using my Mighty Mister to spray some water just to make that spray a little bit more fluid, lighten it up just a little bit, and spread out across the background. My embossed snowflakes are going to resist that spray, so I will still get those beautiful silver snowflakes. I'm just going to have some blue shimmer in my background. So the first card that I'm creating is going to be with that Twinkle Bright tree that has been foiled. I'm coloring it quickly with some Copic markers. The greens that I'm using here are YG63 and YG67. You could use 3 shades of the same color if you wanted to deepen the shading to it. Because this is such a simple image, I decided to just go with 2 shades. So I'm starting off with the YG63. I'm going to color the entire tree, and then I'm going to go in with the YG67, add some strokes where I want the shading, which is going to be underneath each of the layers of the tree. And then I'm going to go back in with that YG63 and blend those colors together. Now, because this is the tree, I don't necessarily need perfect blending to it. So I do keep some of those strokes in there. It's a personal preference. You can blend as much or as little as you want. And just like you could do 3 different shades of the same color to deepen that shading, it's really a personal preference thing. I do like to put that shading underneath the layer of the tree above it, and you can see how that really brings out that layer. The Prism foil that I foiled this image with, it doesn't necessarily resist the ink. The ink is going to be on top of that foil, but this color or the colors are light enough that it doesn't interfere with it, as well as the fact that it coordinates with the tree. So if there's some of the foil that is colored, it's going to work out beautifully. The other thing is I kind of avoid some of the outer areas of the tree. So I'm not super picky, but I do try to avoid the outlines, but the inner details I do color right over top of that. For my ornaments, I'm using some R17 and R20. R20 is the lighter color, it's the light pink, so I start with that one first. Then I go in with the R17 to do my shading. So I go all the way around each one of the ornaments, a little bit heavier on the bottom, and then I'm going to go back in with that R20 and blend those two together. Now you could just take that R17 and just color the ornaments flat red, but I do think doing the R20 ahead of time and having just that little bit of highlight on there just adds a little bit of visual dimension to those ornaments. You could leave those ornaments as is, but once I'm done layering and assembling my card, I am going to put some glossy accents on top of them. It's going to add some gloss as well as shine to those ornaments. Now underneath that tree is some ground, and I just assume that there's snow on there. So rather than leave that completely white, I'm using a little bit of C1 just to add a little bit of shadow to the snow. Even though snow is white and it looks completely white, there is going to be just a touch of shadow in there. So I just put in a little bit of C1. It's a really, really pale gray, and it's a color that you can barely see, but it just adds a little bit of detail. I use a gold gel pen for the star at the top of the tree, and now we're ready to layer our cards together. So my mat for this is some fern cardstock cut to 4 1/8 inches by 5 3/8 inches. My foiled image piece here is trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. I'm using some Barely Art glue in a fine line bottle. That liquid glue gives me a little bit of wiggle room to move things in place. And the fine line bottle means I can use it for large areas like this to glue my cards together, but I can also use it for the smaller die cuts, adding as much or as little glue as I need. So with my card assembled, I can add the glossy accents to the ornaments. I'm going to put some stickles on top of the gold gel pen for the star. And then because even though I have a really fine tip on that stickles bottle, it doesn't get all of the points of the star. So I use my die pick just to draw the stickles out, so it goes all the way to the tips of those stars there. For my next card, I'm going to use the snowflake embossed background with that shimmer spray on it. I'm using some silver cardstock from the Silver Treasured Cardstock pack. This one is the matte finish. That piece was trimmed to 4 1/8 inches by 5 3/8 inches. And I will be trimming my snowflake background to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. I'm going to first do a little bit of ink blending around the edges just to give it a little bit of a frame to it. I have that piece on my sticky mat. I'm using some Chip Sapphire Distress ink with a large blending brush. I love these large blending brushes for backgrounds because you can get as subtle or as heavy of an inking as you want. You just need to be a little bit heavier as well as add a few different layers. With that ink blending done, I'm just cutting about 1/8 of an inch off of each side so that I have even inking all around it. What I should have done was trim this piece down before doing my ink blending around the edges. I thought I actually had until I went to go lay it on top of my card and then realized that I hadn't trimmed it down quite yet, but typically I will trim things down ahead of time. Once I've glued that snowflake piece onto my card base, I can add a very simple sentiment. I did one of the embossed ones because it coordinates with the embossed snowflakes. Even though we have some metallic gloss from the embossing as well as the shimmer in the background, this card could use just a tiny little bit more sparkle. So I'm using some opal gems in the centers of some of the snowflakes. I'm not doing it on all of them. I think less is more. So a little bit on some of the snowflakes makes it a little bit more interesting. I'm using my die pick to help me put those gems down. I just pierce the pick or the tip of that die pick into the adhesive underneath the gem, place it in the center of the snowflake, and then use my finger to just push that gem down where I want it to be. So here we have our finished card. Super, super simple. I did the shimmer spray here, but you could do some ink blending, and I will do ink blending on one of my backgrounds. Now I wanted to mention that the color scheme for this set, or the color palette for the set of cards that I'm creating, is from the new DIY deck expansion pack. This is a Christmas pack. There's 12 different cards with 12 different images on them. And just like the original DIY deck, they do have little tips on the back of them, or color palette tips, or color theory, I should say. So they are a great expansion pack for Christmas cards to come up with different Christmas palettes. And some of them are traditional, some of them are non-traditional. So I chose one that was non-traditional for this one, but I love the different variety of palettes that you can choose from that pack, and I'll be using them in several videos. So for my background for my next card, I'm using a piece of Malibu cardstock, and I used it with that Snowfall Shimmer background press plate in my die cutting machine. I embossed it in the machine. So I used the layering for embossing a die cut, and it just presses that pattern into the paper. I used a little bit of Chipped Sapphire Distress ink to ink blend to add just a little bit of an ombre look to it. And then I used a Hero Arts white pigment pad to rub over the surface just to bring out the snowflakes a little bit more. You definitely want to make sure that your Chipped Sapphire ink is dry, or heat set it ahead of time just to make sure you're not going to be lifting up wet ink with your white pad. I trimmed my embossed piece down to 4 inches by 5¼ inches, and then I have a piece of Cosmic Sky cardstock that I'm using for a mat for this card, and that is trimmed to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8 inches. Off screen, I die cut the pieces for the Magi, and for this one here, I'm using a combination of orchid cardstock as well as violet cardstock. I love Spellbinders layering dies because when you die cut the pieces, it puts a little impression on the die cut, so you know exactly where the other layers are supposed to go. It leaves very little guesswork to it, and it makes it really easy to put the pieces together. And this is where using liquid glue in a fine tip bottle comes in really handy. Not only can you wiggle and move and shimmy things in place, but you can also put as little or as much glue as you want. And you can see some of these pieces are fairly tiny, so they need just a tiny dot of glue. Some of them a little bit bigger. So it's nice to have one glue that will adhere everything. So once I have the pieces together, I put them under an acrylic block just to hold everything nice and flat. I can make sure that everything is staying aligned, and it frees up my hands to work with other things. The faces are die cut out of some fawn cardstock, and the hair and beards are cut out of acorn cardstock. The crowns and the gifts that they're carrying is die cut out of some the gold and silver cardstock from the treasured gold and silver cardstock packs, just to add a little bit of metallic accents to them. So once that first one done, I can start working on the second one. This one is die cut out of some Malibu cardstock as well as Cosmic Sky cardstock. The assembly is exactly the same. The figure for all three of them is exactly the same. One of the dies has a few different choices for beards as well as headpieces. So the robes for the wise men are a little bit larger, so you need a little bit larger pieces of cardstock, but a lot of the faces, beards, and headpieces are just tiny little die cuts, so they'd be a great way to use up some cardstock scraps. So for the third wise man, I'm using some rainforest cardstock as well as fern cardstock. I wanted to make sure that they all looked distinct. Another option for these wise men would be to use some foiled accents on cardstock, colored cardstocks, and then die cut them. I think that would look great as well. Like you could even use that Snowfall shimmer background on a colored cardstock and then die cut some of the pieces out of it, which just give them a little bit more of a regal look to them. This die set also has a die cut that cuts a bunch of stars. So I do have a star that is die cut out of some glitter silver cardstock to use on my background, and it's going to coordinate with the metallic accents on the wise men as well. There's a little opening in the face looking like an eyebrow, so I have just little bits of acorn cardstock that I'm gluing behind it. The beard die does cut one piece, but rather than die cut the beards multiple times just to get multiple of those pieces, I'm just using a scrap of cardstock. They're going to be glued to the background of your cards anyway, so you're never going to know that it's not actually a die cut piece and it's just a scrap of cardstock. So with my wise men assembled, I can glue my background of my card together, and then I can glue the wise men down. Now I'm going to work from right to left so that the hands of the other wise men are in front of the one on the right. So I do want them to be centered. So I do place the center one on my card background, but when I'm gluing down the one on the right, I do kind of move that. I just want to make sure that they've got some even space to them. So I glue all three of them down, put that acrylic block on there to let that glue sit for a moment, especially because I embossed that background. So there's not quite as much surface for them to adhere to. So I want to make sure they have some good contact, and that acrylic block really helps with that. Then I can glue the gifts in their hands Just putting a little bit of glue on top of where their hands are, and then I can place each one of those die cuts on there. So I have the wise men here on that embossed background. You could use them or put them on a plain background as well, or even one of your foiled snowflake backgrounds would look fantastic as well. I'm using that with my snow notes card, so I didn't want to use that piece up, but they will work on many different backgrounds. So for my next card here, I'm using that Snow Notes die set. I'm going to do the snowman as intended for my first card, and then I'm going to change it up for the second one. So this has a die in it that says fa la la, and it has an insert in it. When I'm die cutting those pieces, I will often use some Best Ever craft tape to tape those inserts in, just to make sure there's nice even space to them before I'm die cutting. For my background, I'm using the foiled snowflakes background, and I have it trimmed down to 4 inches by 5¼ inches. I'm using 3 different distress inks to do ink blending on that background. So I have my piece on my sticky mat. I'm starting off with Stormy Sky. I'm using those large blending brushes to blend those colors together. I do that Stormy Sky about the bottom third. Then I'm using some Faded Jeans. I do that about the middle third, and then some Chipped Sapphire on the top third. So we blend all of them together. And again, you can make these inks as light or as dark as you want them. I want to have some color there, but I don't necessarily want my background to be super, super dark. It's really just a personal preference though. For the mat around this, I am using some silver cardstock, that matte silver cardstock that I used earlier, gluing that to my A2 card base, and then I can glue my snowflake background on there. Set those aside to dry while I assemble my snowman. And that silver mat was trimmed to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8 inches. So the snowmen are really easy to assemble. I have them all die cut, ready to go. I will often do a lot of my die cutting ahead of time and just have it stored in my craft stacks. I love the fact that they will hold everything all together in one spot, and I know I'm not going to lose die cuts when I have them stored there. For my snowman, I just have them die cut out of some classic white cardstock. There are 2 pieces that go behind where the mouth is, as well as the little pieces of coal are. Gluing those behind there, and then putting them underneath my acrylic block to dry. Whenever I'm assembling die cuts, I kind of move back and forth between different pieces. So I will glue together all of those black pieces on the 3 snowmen, and then I'm going to glue the little carrot noses on them. This way, different pieces can start setting while I'm gluing something else. So I don't ever just do one figure at a time. I tend to work in between all of them. Again, just to let that glue start to set just a little bit. I have my scarves die cut out of some Malibu cardstock. All of the scarves are on one die, so I just die cut them one color for this card. For my next card, I will do some multiple colors. So there, you can pick and choose which, like whether you want them all one color or whether you want them multiple colors. Those extra pieces, I'll just put in a Ziploc bag, store it with my die set, so next time I go to use it, if by chance I have a color already die cut that is what I was going to use or what's going to work with the idea that I had, it's a great way to use them up. That way I don't have to store them anywhere else. I know that if I'm using that die set, that's likely when I'm going to want them. It just makes the most sense to me. There's a little choir book or a little music book for them to hold. So I have this center one holding it. There's also a die in that or with that book that just kind of a half book. So if you wanted these guys to be a little bit shorter and wanted that to go a little bit off of the card or whatnot, you could use that piece. You can see that right in there in the screen. I end up not using it. I wasn't necessarily thinking when I was doing my die cuts about how tall these guys were, and it would not make sense for them to be holding kind of a half a book. And my little music book there is die cut out of some poppy cardstock. We have some stick arms for them as well. Those are die cut out of acorn cardstock. And again, using that liquid glue means that I can move and shimmy those until I have perfect placement. Once all of my snowmen are glued together, I can start adding them to my card background. So I'm going to start with the 2 outer snowmen. I want the center one to be in front of those outer ones. So I'm going to move those to the side, and I do go off my snowflake background because I want there to be as much space as possible for that center one. So I go a little bit out. Sometimes, depending on the design that you're going for, I just think it looks a little bit more interesting when some of that design goes a little bit outside the lines anyways. So that works perfectly for this. With all my snowmen glued down, I can glue down that fa la 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 sentiment. And because I have that fa la 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 one, I don't necessarily need one of the other ones that I had created with that press plate and die set, but you could use one of those and put it on the inside. For the change up for the snow notes, these guys reminded me of a card that I made, I want to say like 15-20 years ago, and it was of a singing reindeer holding a book. So I took those snow notes dies and I die cut them out of acorn cardstock. I also pulled in the Cozy Toes Slippers die set. This was one of the clubs from October 2024. It is available on the Spellbinders website. And I'm using that for the ears as well as little reindeer antlers. So I have the ears and the antlers die cut out of fawn cardstock. I used a pink Posca pen to color in the pink bits from on the inside of the ears. Most of the snowman pieces I already assembled off screen simply because it was exactly the same as my snowmen. I just changed up the colors. Now, rather than using those carrots as carrots, I die cut them out of white and I made them teeth for inside the reindeer mouth. The card that I made many, many years ago, and it was inspired by someone else's card. I have no idea who it was, so it wasn't an idea I came up with. It was one that was totally inspired by someone else's idea. It had teeth. Those reindeer had teeth and they were just absolutely adorable. So I took those carrots, die cut them in white, use a pair of detail scissors to just cut a tiny, tiny little notch. And I'm using the thick side of the carrot, the end part of the carrot. And then I just cut the tip off and glue those into the mouth area before gluing that black shadow on the back. For the noses to the reindeer, I used one of the snowman die, the one that had the biggest pieces of coal. I die cut that out of fawn cardstock and then one out of poppy cardstock because I wanted one of the reindeer to have like a red nose. And I glued those where those carrots were intended to go. Then I can glue on the little ears as well as the antlers. Now I am keeping in mind when I glue these ears down as well as the antlers that these guys are facing up. So they're not going to be right at the top of the head. So I'm trying to make sure to position them based on the position of their head. Now, after I completed these little reindeer snow notes guys, I realized that you might be able to change up or to use the stick arms from this die set to create some antlers. You wouldn't have ears. The ears do come from that Cozy Toes die set. I really love the way these turned out and I'm happy that I used that Cozy Toes one, but if you don't have that one, you may be able to use the little stick arms to create your own antlers with those. Would obviously look just a little bit different, but it was just an idea I wanted to share. For the background of my card, I'm using that that acorn cardstock as my mat. You can see that's the same piece that I die cut my little snow notes reindeer guys out of. Anytime I'm card making, if I can utilize my cardstock or stretch it just a little bit more, I do, and that's one of the ways that I do it. For my background for this, I'm using the solid hot foiled snowflake background. It is a little bit flashy, but for this particular design, I kind of think the reindeer guys take the focus from that background. So I think they're more the focus in that background. But again, if you wanted a solid or a more subtle background, you could use the type of background that I used on the last card. Then I glued my little reindeer guys the same way as I glued those snowmen, starting with the two outer ones and then putting the inner one in, and then chose one of the sentiments to glue on the top. And as I said before, for this one, I chose 3 different colors for the scarves for these guys so you can see how they look with totally different colored scarves. To add just a little bit of extra texture, I put some glossy accents on those nose. It's just going to add that gloss as well as that shine. And I absolutely love the final result of that. I think they look so adorable and so much fun. For my last card, I'm using that Twinkle Bright Tree, and I am going to color it with some Prismacolor pencils. So I chose 3 different greens here. I have 913 Spring Green, 912 Apple Green, and 911 Olive Green. And then I also have 1060 20% Cool Gray, just for a little bit of gray at the bottom of the tree, just like I did with the Cool Gray for the Copic markers. First thing I do is color the image with my Prismacolor pencils. You don't have to be really careful with this, and I am coloring right over top of those ornaments. I plan on adding some Silver Nouveau drops on those ornaments, so it's going to cover everything underneath it anyways, so I don't have to be really careful and color around them. So I'm going to start off with the Spring Green, which is the lightest color. Then I'm going to go in with the Apple Green. So this one is the medium shaded green, and I'm coloring it the same way as I did my Copic marker one. So I'm doing my shading right underneath each one of those layers of the tree, because those branches above them would be creating a shadow. Once I'm done with that medium shade, I can go in with the dark shade for the olive green. Now I'm going to blend these Prismacolor pencils with some Gamsol. So I have a little dish here that I pour a bit in. I use a paper stump in order to blend it. And whenever I blend Prismacolor pencils, I do try to make sure to start with the lightest color first and then work my way darker, so that I don't have to clean off my paper stump quite as often. If by chance I have to clean it off, I have a little piece of sandpaper. I can just sand the end off and it cleans it off for the next layer. So for my greens, I start with the lightest of the greens, blending all of those layers, and then I go in and do the medium and the dark. That way, when I blend, I don't have to blend each layer separate. I can do all of the green and then do all of the medium and dark color. That medium and dark, they're close enough to each other that you don't have to really worry about cleaning off your paper stump between those colors, but you certainly can if you wanted to. So you can see that that coloring was super, super quick and super easy, because there's basically only that green. That little bit of that cool gray took no time at all, but they blend together absolutely beautiful. Just like my foiled one, I'm going to do some gold gel pen for the star at the top of the tree. I always love metallic accents with the matte finish of different coloring. I'm going to add some stickles on top of that gold gel pen. So the stickles I'm using is Stardust Stickles. It is a transparent but opalescent glitter, so you can see that gold underneath it, so it's not covering it up. I still use that die pick just like I did for the first card, and pull out the tips of that stickles to make sure that I have sharp ends to those stars. And then I use the Silver Nouveau drops for the ornaments. I'm positioning them exactly where those ornaments were drawn on the image, but I do make sure that some of the ornaments are bigger, some of them are smaller. It just adds a little bit of variety, makes it look a little bit more interesting. Then I let that completely dry, and we have a beautiful but simple card here. That silver embossing totally ties in with those Silver Nouveau drops, as well as the silver mat that I have around that. That tree image was trimmed down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches, and that silver mat is 4 1/8 by 5 3/8 inches. Not sure if I mentioned that. Then we have our reindeer snow notes. I think they are absolutely adorable. I'm so happy with how they turned out, as well as our regular snowmen. So that gives you 2 different options of different ways to use them. And for both cards, I used all 3 figures for that, but you could just use 1 if you wanted to. You don't necessarily have to use all 3. Then we have our Wiseman card with the 3 wise men and the star in the background. And then our snowflake background that has that beautiful blue shimmer spray on the back. That shimmer spray doesn't show up as well on video as the embossing does. You can see the metallic shine from the embossing, but not as much from the shimmer, but it looks gorgeous in person. And then we have our foiled tree that was colored in Copics, and then with the glossy accents on top of those ornaments. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.